level of excitement that I have in a little while, but what we're going to start with is the art form of distortion. Look, over the past 3 webinars, we've discussed the run stitch, the satin stitch, the fill stitch, and the rules associated with each of them. While most of this or much of this can certainly be controlled and has been automated and saved to sew, over those webinars, I've covered more of the manual type of control. I want to review those rules specifically for just a little bit. It'll just take me a few minutes. But then I want to go into what I simply call the combinations of stitches. And again, folks, this has to totally do with my measurement theory of embroidery creation and control. What simplified embroidery, especially since we went onto the computer, is that the measurement theory brought absolute numbers into distortion values. You'll understand more about that as I go on. Let's do a little bit of review, though, on the stitch types and the rules to those stitch types. Look, while I didn't bring one up, right off the bat I'll start with a running stitch and just make a very simple running stitch on the screen. The rules to the running stitch, probably the stitch type that actually has the least amount of rules, the running stitch. And the basic rules for the running stitch, and I'll go ahead and mark the needle penetration points, is length, okay? We utilize running stitches for our underlay. Underlay, again, are the stitches that give loft to the top stitch of your embroidery design. Also, all of our fine detail work is done with the running stitch. Now, there is a range to length with running stitches. For me, for a running stitch to show, those lengths range between 1 and 4 millimeters. Now, that's quite the range. Let me explain. When we're doing things like minute lettering and minute detail, I will go down to lengths of 1.5 millimeter. When I am utilizing the run stitch, though, for my underlay, I utilize run stitch lengths of 3 to 4 millimeters. You'll notice that when I selected the run stitch up here in the digitizing tabs up here on the top where all your digitizing functions are, you'll see in the properties box that the default setting is 3 millimeters. The basic rule for the running stitch is length equals loft. Short running stitches yield no loft. They drive down into the fabric, disappear, and add very little loft to the top stitch. The longer the running stitch, the greater the loft. Underneath most of my running stitch, or excuse me, my satin stitch lettering, I use running stitch lengths of 3 millimeters, okay? Length equals loft. Underneath my fill stitches, I increase it to 4 millimeters in length. The longer the stitch, the greater the length. Now, I've said many times through my webinars that for every rule, there's an exception to the rule. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to keyboard a couple of even just simple letter I's next to each other. Excuse me, I want to make them caps. Just one second, and I'll bring them up, okay? The exception to the rule of running stitch length, and here's one that's actually a pretty neat little trick, okay? One of the things when I do small keyboard lettering is the connection stitch in between letters. We finish one letter, like here in the letter I. Now, excuse me, let me go into the commands and let me turn off the, I do not want to trim in between characters. I want none. I actually want that to be a stitch. When we finish one letter and it makes the move over into the next letter, that stitch that steps across drives me crazy, okay? I despise that stitch. Why? It sticks out like a sore thumb, okay? Why? Because it's elongated. We drop the stitch, we step over into the other letter. Basically what you've done is you've floated that stitch on top of the fabric. That length would equal loft as an underlay. So here's an exception to the rule. When would I ever go below a 1 millimeter stitch? When I'm connecting small lettering together, and it's a very simple trick. Just go into your stitch edit. Your stitch edit tab over here on the editing bar on the left is right here. If you click on stitch editing, and again, one of the fabulous things about Floriani software is you don't even have to specifically get on a stitch. When you get close to a stitch, you see how that black dot highlights? I'm not clicking anything. That tells me right there I've got the stitch. What I'm actually looking for is I'm looking for the first stitch. I entered this letter I here. It made the move over into this letter I. There's my first stitch, or I think so. I'll left click, grab it, and then I move it around to make sure I've got it. At this point in time, I right click, and I'm simply going to put insert before. I'm going to put a stitch with a left click down here on the bottom left of the letter I, and then I'm normally going to drop 2 to 3 tiny little stitches in between the lettering, always ending on the far right side of that letter I, which would have been the last stitch. And a right click ends the segment. I'll show you the needle penetration points. These stitches I throw at 2 to 3 tenths of a millimeter in length. I use this specifically with small lettering where they're spaced about 8 tenths to 1 millimeter apart. By dropping tiny little stitches, 2 to 3 tenths of a millimeter in length, in between those stitches, I drive them down into the fabric. They disappear into almost all porous fabrics, knits and such. On your twills, canvases, more solid fabrics, you'll see them, but not really that much, okay? It drives them down into the fabric. 2 things are accomplished with this. Number 1, you don't have to trim in between those stitches. See, when that stitch shows, I'm compelled to trim that thread. In fact, it drives me so crazy, I will physically stop the machine and trim right then. When I drop these 2 to 3 tiny little stitches in between, I no longer have to trim them, number 1. Number 2, it makes that embroidery a continuous filament of thread. That is the ultimate rule in embroidery. Embroidery is best laid in a continuous filament of thread. It will absolutely eliminate your trimming those threads out. Look, many times when we trim that thread out, what happens? We unravel the letter before, okay? It's because the digitizer, he or she, might not have used a proper lock stitch, all right? That's a simple little trick. It's an exception to the rule. Again, in review, running stitch, the major rule is length. Length equals loft, 1 to 4 millimeters, 1 for minute detail, 2 to 3 under most of my keyboard lettering or any lettering that I'm creating. Most of my satin stitch I'm creating, 2 to 3, 3 probably being optimum for me. Underneath fill stitch is 4. The exception to the rule is when I want to hide a running stitch. Look, this is not only just in connecting letters. If I wanted to hide a running stitch of even another color under another running stitch, I drop tiny little stitches, 2 to 3 tenths of a millimeter in length. Then when I go over them with an elongated run stitch, the weight of the thread itself hides those threads. It's an amazing little trick, and I think something we could all practice and learn a lot from. Let's talk about the satin stitch. The first rule in the satin stitch is width, okay? And I always use the example, excuse me, I've got to pull up the design, and of course, I don't have the right design pulled up. If I don't have it pulled up right, I'll make sure, yeah, I had it right on here. The first rule of the satin stitch is proper width. Look, negative things happen when we run embroidery designs. Probably the most negative thing is that we eat garments. I discussed this when we talked about the satin stitch, but why garments are eaten is in the execution of a satin stitch made too narrow. Because the constant of pull, okay, as the embroidery needle penetrates material and it locks a knot basically to the bobbin, in that bobbin assembly, in that hook, it simply pulls the thread in. Example, a letter I always gets narrower than the size that you created, okay? When you make a satin stitch too narrow, you're going to eat the garment, okay? I've explained this before. I'm just going to cover it very quickly. The minimum width of a satin stitch digitized should be 1.4 millimeters. So here's a very simple suggestion. We look at lettering like here in welcome. Is this lettering going to work? We don't really know. Look, this is what makes the measurement theory so cool and makes it work so well. Zoom into your lettering. Grab your ruler at this point. Make sure that you're in metric and measure the width of the satin stitch. That's 1 millimeter. That's telling you it's not going to work, okay? Now, it's not necessarily going to eat your garment at 1 millimeter, but I'll guarantee that lettering is going to sink away into the fabric. What can we do? Look, Save to Sew can control this, but manually it can also be controlled just like this. Select your lettering over here in the sequence view. Once it highlights, come up to your Properties box and click on your Pull Push tab. All right? It's located right here. You see where I am? Select it. One of the greatest things about the software, pull and push for a long time was kind of a by guess, by golly. What made the measurement theory so exciting and simplified the process so much is they simply became numbers, okay? So it's 1 millimeter wide. I want it to be 1.4 millimeters wide. Select it, go into your pull push. Right here, choose absolute. Why absolute? See, pull and push always worked on percentages. The absolute values made it so simple. Why? Because we can absolutely tell you how wide we want it to be. It was 1 millimeter wide. So I say I want you to absolutely, on both sides of the satin stitch, right down here is your absolute value. Say I want you to be 0.2 of a millimeter wider. Click apply, and you just corrected that lettering, okay? The minimum width of a satin stitch is 1.4 millimeters. Density is also an issue with satin stitching. So you know what I suggest that you do? Now again, Save to Sew controls it automatically, but one of the neat things that you can do is simply make a series of letter I's. Start with a density of 0.4, then do a second letter I with a 0.5, then a one with a 0.6, a 0.7, and a 0.8 per se. When you're working on a new fabric you've never worked on before, I call it a satin stitch density chart. Simply run those satin stitching on it, okay? Now, I've explained this before, but I'm going to explain it one more time. Look, if you ever run a design, and the design runs absolutely amazing, okay, and you feel of it, and it just feels so incredibly, and you go, oh my gosh, it feels like butter. I want all my satin stitching to feel like butter. Density is so simple to measure in an embroidery design. Watch. You run a design, it feels like butter, zoom into the edge of the satin stitch, grab your ruler, make sure you're in metric, go from one stitch along the edge of a straight line of stitching, like an I, or in this case a W, measure the distance down to the next stitch. You see how that says 0.5, folks? That's what density is. Density is simply the distance between stitches along the edge of any given stitch type. Certainly running stitches don't utilize densities. Satin stitches and frill stitches do. Now, what's the point of an exercise like this? Is because, look, you can have, and I'm actually going to close this one down, just open up, or let's just take here, this design right here, these two letter I's. We run a design. It feels like butter. We measure the density on that design, and it says it's a 0.5, okay? Now, we bring another design up on the screen. Look, before you ever run that design, grab your ruler. Go to the edge of that stitch type and measure the density, okay? See how that again says 0.5? Well, look, if you want to, the way density works is the higher the number, the lighter the density. So you know what? I'm actually going to change this one right here. Let me just select this, okay? And I'm actually going to change this density to, it defaults at a 0.5, but I'm going to turn it down to a 0.4, okay? A 0.4 being a heavier density, excuse me. See how the stitches got closer together? Well, you know what? I just ran a design, and it ran like butter, and it had a 0.5 density. Well, that's telling you that the correct density to use in most lettering is a 0.5. So you have a design you've never run before, you measure it, and you see a 0.4, or even sometimes you'll see a 0.3. That's what happens when you have bulletproof embroidery. The density is too heavy. Well, what about this? What about if you can just select that lettering and it highlights, you come right up to the fill tab, and you say, you know what, you are a 0.4, I'm going to change you to a 0.5, and you just effectively change the density. You just soften the design. Make density charts, folks. Don't be hesitant to change density in designs. Again, this is a little bit of an advanced class. Safe to Sew does indeed control this, but I think it's wonderful to understand kind of from whence it came. Total control means just that. You have total control of your embroidery design. You can go into one specific lettering and change the density. You can go into entire areas and change the density. The software is exciting because of that. It yields total control. There's no reason for bulletproof embroidery. Study your densities. You'll see it makes a world of difference when you're running your embroidery. The next rule to satin stitching are angles, okay? And again, angles. The problem with angles is, look, another negative that happens when we run embroidery is we bird nest. The reason that we bird nest, again in review, is how we go around the corner. What a digitizer has done here, he or she, is they've come from a straight angle of stitching into a curve, back into a straight angle of stitching. You force the same amount of stitching from here to here as you have from here all the way over to here. This right here is what normally causes bird nesting, folks. I always tell this at my seminars, and I've said it before in my webinars. I have a very technical term for this type of cornering. I call it the ka-chunk stitch. You hear it on your machines. You go around the corner, and to the inside of the corner, you hear the machine go ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. Sound effects are very important in a webinar like this. Look, there's two ways to corner, the wrong way and the right way. What we've done here is a process that I simply call angle in and angle out. I enter the angle of the corner at the same relative angle as the corner, and I come out of it at the same relative angle. Why? Because look now, I'm putting the same amount of density from here to here as I have from here to here. It's a softening technique. You basically de-ka-chunk it. Made that word up myself. I like the way it sounds. You soften the angle. So look, here's what I'm saying about satin stitching. I always bring a design up. I look for the narrowest satin stitch in the design, and I measure it in width. If it's under 1.4 millimeters, select it, add a little more width. You'll never eat another garment. But then I also always check a couple of angles. If I see angles like this, okay, and not like this, what can be done? Is there anything that you can do? Absolutely. Look, select the lettering. At this point, come down to the third icon on the left called Shape and click it. One of the great things about Floriani software is that, and look, this is a stock design, but one of the great things is when you bring a design into it, it thinks it digitized it. So it gives you digitized angle lines. And look, I'll evaporate the stitches, I'll hide them. You see the straight, the angle, and the straight, okay? All you have to do to correct it is grab this angle line right here and simply pull it down. You have a frame of reference. You're looking at the angle of the corner. You don't even have to be exact. Just be close. Grab this angle line here and pull it over. I'll bring the stitches back up. I haven't completed it yet. You see the straight, the angle, and the straight. I move two angle lines, right click, left click, and you'll never bird nest again in the embroidery process. That's an amazing feature to the software. And you know what? Let me be very honest here, because this happens within the software. One of the issues with keyboard lettering, and I'm just going to make a block keyboard lettering L right here. You know what? I am one to, if we have an issue within the software, all right, and I know of that issue, I'm going to tell you about that issue, folks. And what that issue is that a lot of keyboard lettering that is created was created by graphic artists. This is a piece of software that was existing, okay? It had well over or right at 100 or so fonts already in it. Many of those fonts have hard corners, all right? And you can see it right here. Keyboard lettering, my own software, has the ka-chunk stitch. Well, is there anything you can do about this? Absolutely. Watch. Once again, you see that ka-chunk stitch, simply select the lettering, it's going to highlight, okay? Now, the fact is that if I go into shape and click on it, nothing takes place. That's font technology. You cannot edit font technology, but you can do this. DJ came up with this, and this is incredible. Select the lettering, okay? Once the lettering is selected, right-click and simply click on Break Up Text. Break up text. When you break up the text, you're basically telling it you're no longer a font, you're a stitch file. Why? Because now I can come into it and I can select it. Let's make sure we selected the satin stitch part. And you see the angle lines? By breaking up the text, you turned it into a stitch file. You now have angle lines. Watch. Grab this one, pull it up. Grab this one, pull it over. Right-click, left-click. You'll never bird nest again in the embroidery process. It happens, folks. It happens on lots of software. Lots of keyboard lettering was created like that. Keyboard lettering can take months to create just one letter style. We have not had time to go back in and redigitize all those fonts. I'd rather tell you it's going to take place and show you that we've made a very simple correction in it. The other rules to the satin stitch are your pull and your push, okay? And once again, because pull and push, or because of the measurement theory, pull and push has simply now become a number, because being a master digitizer for years was actually understanding. See, to be a master digitizer, you learned a long time ago that you never digitize to the lines of your artwork. You always went outside of the lines. That's how pull was controlled. To control push, and what push is pull makes the lettering narrower. Push would actually make that letter I grow in height. It's based on density and thread weight. Thread has weight, measurable weight, okay? Density is how close we put our stitches together. Put your stitches too close together, okay? The weight of the thread builds up on each other, forces the letter I to be taller at the top or the bottom. Let's say I was digitizing this letter I and it was my artwork. Well, look, how we control pull and push for years was like this. To control pull on the left and the right, I would actually digitize outside of the lines. At the top and the bottom, I would cut a little off the top and the bottom. We call the process of going outside of the lines over swinging. We call the process of cutting it a little shorter just that, just capping it, cutting it off a little bit. We allow for the natural push, the natural pull. I'm not going to get into it, but there was a method of hand-eye control that used to make this process pretty simple as a digitizer. But once again, when the measurement theory came into being, they simply became numbers, and I want to review those numbers. I'm going to get rid of that, which I just did. The natural pull of a satin stitch on both sides is 2 to 3/10 of a millimeter. The natural push of a satin stitch, how much taller is it going to grow at the top and the bottom, is also 2 to 3/10 of a millimeter. So one of the things, and what's great about the software, select it, go into your pull-push compensation. Floriani software is one of the only softwares that not only give you pull in absolute values, but it also gives you push in absolute values. So I'm going to tell this letter I that in the pull, I want you to absolutely get 2 to 3/10 of a millimeter wider on both sides. Okay? In the push, I'm going to say on both sides, I want you to get shorter, 2 to 3/10 of a millimeter. Click Apply, and you'll see that it actually got shorter and got wider. A very simple way, and it's kind of cool to see pull and push work right within the software. Keyboard a block letter I next to a letter O, okay? What you're going to see when you do that is they're digitized the same size, and you see the box around it. Just hit File and Save to So, okay? Pick any material type and simply tell it was Magic Wand. It was digitized perfectly. Click Next, Apply, and Yes. Let it do its thing. It's going to tell you how to stabilize it, then boom. Okay? You saw it actually take place. You see how much taller the O is than the I? The I got shorter in height because that's the natural push. It got wider, allowing for the natural pull. The letter O is a total letter of pull. It got wider, but it grew in height, allowing for the very natural pull. Again, can be controlled and saved to so, but you have the absolute control of doing it right here in your pull and push. And it, again, is one of the only softwares in the world that gives you both absolute values of pull and push. 2 to 3/10 pull, 2 to 3/10 push, okay? Those are the rules to satin stitches. Fill stitches are really quite simple. When you have a fill stitch, you again have pull and push issues, okay? In fact, you know what? I should have probably just digitized a very simple fill, and I'll go ahead and do that. I'll just make a fill stitch. When you make a fill stitch, the natural pull of a fill stitch, and this stitch is stitching left to right, okay? The natural pull of that fill stitch is, in my book, I wrote 3 to 5/10 of a millimeter. But machines run faster than when I wrote my book. So I tell people, go 5/10 of a millimeter now. I'm actually going to make some guidelines here so you can see this take place. So the natural pull of a fill stitch is 5/10 of a millimeter. The natural push of a fill stitch is 3 to 5/10 of a millimeter. I didn't quite make that quite square enough, okay? So the simplest way to control it, if you want to do it more manually, again, select the fill stitch. Once it's selected, and it'll highlight, go into your pull compensation, say I want you to absolutely give me 5 more tenths of a millimeter. On both sides, that's the natural pull. And on both sides, top to bottom, you want a push of also, let's call it 3/10 of a millimeter. Click Apply. You'll see how it gets wider, okay? And it's gotten shorter. The natural pull is 3 to 5/10. The natural push is 3 to 5/10. The first rule to fill stitching is your pull and your push. Now, the second rule to fill stitching is density, okay? So what I've made here, and this is right out of my book, is a density chart. These are simply a series of boxes about 2 inches wide. Each one has a different density. I start with basically a 0.4, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, 1, 1.2, 1.4. Again, the higher the number you go, the lighter the density, all right? The base density for 40-weight thread is a 0.4. But with a lot of colors, if they're complementary colors to the material that I'm stitching on, let's say I'm stitching a light peach and I'm on like a white material, you can only go 10 to 15% less density, okay? First of all, let me show you how simple it is to measure density. Let me explain something first. I make my density chart. I have a material I've never stitched on before. I run my density chart. What I'm looking for is good coverage. What I mean by that is that I do not want to see the background material through the fill stitch. The highest number that achieves that is the proper density for that given piece of material. For example, let's say we run a design, and that design feels like a piece of butter in our hands. It's not hard and rigid and bulletproof. It feels like butter. Watch how simple density is to measure. Zoom into the edge of that fill. So you just ran a fill. It ran like butter. You want all your fill stitches to feel like that. Zoom into the edge of it. Grab your ruler. Go to any stitch along the edge of that fill and measure the distance over to the next stitch. See how that's a 0.6, folks? That's my density, okay? Again, density is how close we put the stitches. Here's a very simple thing to do. You've got a design you've never run before. You just ran a design and felt like butter and it had a 0.6 density. You bring another design up on the screen. Before you run it, you see it has a fill. Zoom into its fill, because you know what? Measure the density of that fill. See how that's a 0.4? Well, that's 20% more density than that 0.6. Well, you just ran that fill stitch and it had a 0.6. What about if you can do this? Because watch how simple it is. Simply select that fill stitch, okay? Once it's selected right here in the properties box, it's telling you it's that 0.4. What if you just go in there and say, I want it to feel like butter. Turn it into that 0.6 and click apply. And you just changed it into a fill stitch that feels like butter in your hands. Don't be afraid to fool around and play with densities, folks. It softens your embroideries. It makes your embroideries run so much better, okay? First rules to fill stitches, again, pull and push. Next rule to your fill stitches are proper densities. Now, another rule to the fill stitch for me are start and end points, okay? So again, I'm going to generate another fill very quickly. We'll make a fill stitch, okay? Now, once the fill stitch is generated and you select it and go into shape, start points are always indicated by green dots. End points are always indicated by red dots. The thing to do with start and end points, and they're important to fills, is that normally the start point isn't really that important. It's the end point. I normally want the end point. This fill is actually running left to right. So if I come into a slow redraw, and I redraw that fill stitch right there, there's my underlay. Now you see it starts at the bottom, and it moves progressively to the top, okay? That's what I want, although actually what I would do with that end point is I would put that along the edge, the actual edge of that fill stitch, okay? What happens with fills is fills tend to push your materials, all right? The worst thing you can do is put an end point, let's say here in that fill stitch. Why? Because what's going to take place now is it's going to do your underlay. It's going to fill stitch up to the end point. Then it's going to come up here to the top and work its way back to the end point. You're pushing material this way, then you're pushing material that way. That's why many times you'll actually see material pop up. You're pushing the fabric. Now, let me explain something. If you've used a good fusible stabilizer, this is somewhat minimized. Fusing stabilizer onto a piece of especially like a knit material, it stabilizes it so it pushes it less. But again, in a slow redraw, here we go, okay? We're going to run here. Here it comes up, goes to the end point, then it's going to go up and come back down. It's the worst thing you can do with the fill. Always try to put your end point the farthest point away. Start point, end points are a big part of it. Pull and push are one of the rules. Density is a rule. And the last rule I want to talk about with fills
Mr. Walt, you're going to have to get closer to your microphone. You're kind of fading out on us.
That's because I'm excited and I'm moving back and forth. So
well, get close because you're in a fog right now.
Can you hear me better now, Miss Kathy?
No, sir. No, sir. You sound like you're far away from us.
Can you hear me better now?
No, not yet.
Hold on. Can you hear me better now?
No, it's like something's not quite connected.
Okay.
I can hear you, but you sound real far away.
Can someone in the group email and let us know if you can hear me? DJ is on the phone and says he can hear me fine. I don't know if it might be something with your connection.
Maybe it is me then. Okay.
Can everyone hear me fine?
He's good on the phone for me, and he's good on everybody that says you're on the phone. It's good. Well, and Kathleen DeCella says fine.
Miss Kathy, you're the one in the fog then,
I
baby.
must be the one in the fog. There, now it came back like magic.
Okay.
Thank you.
The final rule is direction. In most designs that you'll look that I've digitized over the years, 90% of the designs that I've done, I normally run my fills left to right or straight up and down. The fill is the most obtrusive stitch to material. sometimes when we run fills at like a 45-degree angle, you'll actually see your material twist. It's because you're stitching on the bias of that material, and it affects it in a negative manner. Now, let's go ahead and change this stitch direction. So again, 90% of the time when I'm doing fill stitches, or let's say 95, I'm left to right or straight up and down. While this used to mean a lot to me, and I've just changed this direction now to, let's say, a 45-degree angle or so, it's not so negative now as it was. And again, the biggest reason because of that is fusible stabilizer. When you fuse your stabilizer behind your material, you're solidifying it to the base material. Hence, the distortion of the fabric is greatly minimized. It's greatly minimized. So while it's still important to me, and I guess I'll put it like this, if you ever run a fill and you see your material twisting, guaranteed it's probably there's an angle to that fill. Turn that fill into a straight left or right, 0 degrees or 90 degrees, and the problem will more than likely absolutely disappear. So the rules to your fill stitch are length, density, direction, your start and end points, and your pull and your push. Okay, let's get to what this is really about, because look, what I really want to teach you to do, and I've taught this before, but I want to talk about it again and stress the importance of it, is embroidery, as I always say, again, is an art form of distortion. We talk about eating garments, it's width of satin stitching. We talk about bird nesting, it's angles. We talk about distortion of fabrics, it's density or stitch direction in most cases. Let's talk now about elements separating from other elements in the process, background separating from your outlines. Those of you who've seen my classes know that I always talk about embroidery as 3 stitch types with fairly minimal rules that we just reviewed, but embroidery is also nothing more than very simple combinations of stitches. And in 100% of the embroidery process, folks, there are only 6 possible combinations of stitches. Those combinations of stitches are fill stitches next to fill stitches. A fill stitch next to a fill stitch has a rule. The rule is basically overlaps. Now, of course, you always have your pull and your push rules per se. That's why if I scan in or zoom into the top here, you'll see that my fill going up and down is taller than the one going left to right. That's because the one going up and down is going to pull down. The one going left to right is going to push up. Pull and push is part of that. What I'm talking about now is where they junction into each other. The rule is an overlap. The next combination of stitches are fill stitches next to satin stitches. Again, pull and push is always part of that, but its base rule is also an overlap. The fill stitch needs to overlap into the satin stitch so that you do not get gapping. In fact, folks, every time you've ever run a design and the background pulls away from the outline, the reason literally is nothing more than the digitizer, he or she, when they created it, didn't overlap enough. And again, what makes the measurement theory so special is they simply became numbers. It makes it so easy to check a design to determine what's going to happen before you run it. Imagine that. You can have a design on the screen, and with some very simple measurements, you're going to know if it's going to eat the garment, you're going to know if it's bird nest, and now you're going to know if you're going to get gaps between your backgrounds and your outlines. First combination, fill next to fill. Second combination, fill next to satin. Third combination of stitches are fill stitches next to running stitches. It also has a rule of an overlap. We then have satin stitches next to satin stitches. It has a rule of an overlap. We then put satin stitches next to run stitches. It has a rule of an overlap. And the final combinations of stitches are run stitches next to running stitches. Excuse me. Running stitches next to running stitches do not have a rule of an overlap. They have a spacing rule. And just to tell you, the minimum space I put between running stitches next to running stitches is 0.2 of a millimeter. Okay? When you put stitches 0.2 of a millimeter apart in a running stitch next to a running stitch, basically you're making a fill stitch with an absolute density of 0.4. See, there's always a transition line from one line to another. I'm not even going to get into that. I want to talk about the other 5. Look, all I'm asking you to do, again, you have a design you've never run before, bring it up on the screen. Measure the minimum width of the satin stitch under 1.4, add a little width, you'll never eat a garment. Look at a couple of the angles. If you see those hard angles, change the angles, you'll never bird nest again. But now, I want you to learn to look at combinations of stitches. So you have a design, you've never run it before. You see that it has a fill stitch next to a fill stitch. Zoom into where it measures or where it overlaps into the other. You'll see almost all designs overlap into each other. Only when you're working with auto digitizing or in my Floriani software with the magic wand will you see there's no overlap. Most designs overlap, but many designs don't overlap enough. So here's a fill stitch next to a fill stitch. You see the overlap. Grab your ruler. Go to the edge of the one fill stitch and simply measure the overlap. And you see how that's 1.4 millimeters? Folks, the minimum overlap when you put a fill stitch next to a fill stitch is 1 millimeter or more. If you are overlapped 1 millimeter or more when stabilized correctly, and that is what's so important about Save to Sew, is because it absolutely gives you the correct stabilization that's necessary for that fabric. So when stabilized correctly, if it's overlapped a millimeter or more, that design is telling you it was digitized by a master digitizer. You have to do nothing to it, okay? Nothing to it. It's going to line up and run perfectly for you. Now, let's say you measure an overlap more than 1 millimeter, 1.5, 2 millimeters or such. Is that good or bad? That's good. In fact, the more a design is overlapped, the more it's distorted, the more forgiving it is on your fabric. Look, I call it flaw factor. Look, my Floriani favorite designs have for many years been touted as some of the finest running embroidery data in the world. I'll explain to you why. Because you're listening to a man right now who's probably the most distorted digitizer you're ever going to meet. I basically double the numbers that I'm teaching you. Why? Because when I created those designs 20, 30 years ago, stabilization wasn't what it is today. That product has come a long way, especially with Floriani Stabilizer. Look, back in those days, people were stabilizing with paper. They were stabilizing with coffee filters, tissue paper, okay? So how we controlled it back then was we built it into the design. The more you overlap, the more the design was distorted, the more forgiving it was. In fact, when you see numbers greater than 1 in the case of a fill next to a fill, even if you stabilized a little incorrectly or you were using a non-fusible on a knit, you're still going to line up. The more, the better. Very seldom would I go more than double the number that I'm teaching, but personally, I go about twice. It's flaw factor. It makes it more forgiving. You've all run designs where one time it'll run nice, the next time you run it, you get a little gap. You'll see that that's borderline. They probably overlap 7 or 8 tenths of a millimeter, okay? Now, more is better. 1 is the general rule. But let's say we measure an overlap and it's less than 1 millimeter, 5 or 6 tenths of a millimeter. It's telling you right then and there you're going to get a gap before you ever run the design. How can you control it? Very simple. You can always select, normally the first color is the one that overlaps into the other. You can simply control it in pull. Let's say we measured it, it's 5 tenths. You can go in and say, absolutely, give me 5 tenths more. Or sometimes simpler yet, you can select the red, okay? As you go down or as you click on shape now and you go down along the left side of it, you're going to see this little white square box. Oh, where'd you go? Hold on. Oh, I didn't select it. I'm sorry. You select it, it'll highlight. I didn't select. There we go. And then as we come into shape, okay, nope, yeah, sorry. I'm not thinking quite right tonight. You don't even have to go into shape, but you'll see this little white box right there. You get on top of it, and you have these 2 little arrows. You do not have to go into shape. Just simply select it, okay? You see these 2 little arrows. You can get on top of it, left click, and simply grab the fill and pull it deeper under the other fill. So normally two ways to correct it. You can grab it, pull it deeper, or you can go into your pull-push compensation and add the absolute number that you need to get it to 1. I always add a little more, so I take it up to like 1.2 or 1.3. Now, let's say you have a friend who has software that doesn't edit like this, or you don't want to take the time to do this. Is there another way to correct it? Absolutely. Look, one of the ways that you can correct a design when you have not overlapped enough is by adding more stabilizer. Those of you who've done this process long enough know that when something didn't used to line up and you called the dealer, their solution was normally add more stabilizer and add more stabilizer and maybe add another piece of stabilizer. See, you didn't have an embroidery, you had a blessed billboard on your garment, but it did tend to correct it. Why? Think about it, folks. What you were doing was you were stopping the pull. You were inhibiting the pull. The more stabilizer that you added, you were stopping the extreme amount of pull that can take place, okay? My desire is that you all just learn to pull it deeper or add a little bit more pull compensation. If you ever need to add more than one other piece of stabilizer, I think that's all you ever have to add, because there is one more part of the trick. You have a design 5 or 6/10 of a millimeter overlap, add a second piece of stabilizer. The next part of the trick is learn to slow your machine speed down. The slower you run the machine, the less pull is exerted on the embroidery thread, and many times can auto-correct the design or will correct the design. Fill next to fill, overlap of a millimeter or more. Here they come, fast and furious. The next one is a fill stitch next to a satin stitch. Again, you have a design fill stitch next to a satin stitch. Grab your ruler, go to the satin stitch, measure the overlap of the fill. You'll see that's right about 2, a little over 2. Once again, the rule is 1 millimeter or more. These are important numbers. If it's overlap 1 millimeter or more when stabilized correctly, guaranteed you will not gap. It will not gap. Digitized by a master digitizer. More than 1, better. Flaw factor. It's going to run better even if your hoop's a little too loose or you didn't stabilize quite correctly, you're still going to align correctly. So more is better. Less than 1, again, select it, grab it, pull it deeper, or go into your pull compensation and simply add the absolute amount to get it up to that number. Fill next to a satin stitch is 1 or more millimeter. Third combination is a fill stitch next to a running. This is a little more critical because the running stitch is such a narrow line of stitching. Now, in my book, Destined to Digitize, I wrote 22 years ago that the minimum overlap of a fill next to a run is 3 to 5/10 of a millimeter. I've changed it. I now tell people, go 5/10 of a millimeter. So watch. I grab my ruler. I go to the running stitch. I measure the overlap, 3/10 of a millimeter. I want it to be 5. Well, yes, I can select it, look for that little white square and pull it. But look, it's so simple with the pull compensation. Click on your pull comp and say, look, I want you to absolutely add, and just tell it 2/10 of a millimeter and click apply. Okay, guaranteed. Go now to the line and measure it. You're right at 5/10. That absolute value and knowing these numbers, okay, is critical because it corrects your embroidery data. I'm not putting down anyone. It can take years without a formalized education to know how much to overlap. Until the measurement theory, when I developed that, came along, it was kind of by guess, by golly. Many of the stock designs that were produced for this industry came from the commercial industry. They're 20, 30 years old or older. People didn't know exactly how much to distort. Also, the other issue is many designs are run on solid fabrics. That's why when you go to shows, to the craft shows, when you go into stores and you see these beautiful stock designs, and they look beautiful, you see samples of them run. You take them home and they eat garments, backgrounds pull away from outlines, lettering sinks away into fabrics, okay? Next time, do me a favor, look at what they stitch designs on. They stitch them on twills and canvases. You might as well be stitching on a piece of wood, folks. See, those are materials that yield very little pull. Most of the challenges that we have are on porous fabrics, our knits. 60-40 polycotton blends, 100% Orlon sweaters. For gosh sakes, I've seen so many backgrounds pull away on your baby onesies. Those are porous material where the stitches really sink into it. That's why these numbers are so important. When stabilized correctly, that fill will pull right to that running stitch line, and it will align perfectly. The natural pull of a fill stitch is 0.5 of a millimeter. That's how far you go outside of the running stitch line. There's only 2 more. Satin stitch next to a satin stitch. When you have a satin stitch next to a satin stitch, grab your ruler, go to the one satin, measure the overlap, 1.2, 1.3. Once again, the rule is 1 millimeter or more. Stabilized correctly, 1 millimeter or more tells you digitized by a master digitizer. Guaranteed it will always align for you. Always. You can take that to the bank. If it's more, that's fine. If it's less, grab it, pull a little deeper, or select your pull and simply add the absolute value to get it to 1 or a little bit more than 1. And there's only one more, and that is simply your satin stitch next to a running stitch. The natural pull of a satin stitch is 2 to 3/10 of a millimeter. So when you put a satin stitch next to a running stitch, you go outside of that running stitch 2 to 3/10 of a millimeter. Okay? In review, fill stitch next to a fill stitch is 1 or more. Fill stitch next to a satin stitch is 1 or more. Fill stitch next to a running stitch is 0.5 of a millimeter. Satin stitch next to a satin stitch is 1 millimeter or more. And a satin stitch next to a running stitch is 2 to 3/10 of a millimeter. Folks, you know what? That's 85% of master digitizing. Master digitizing, for the most part, is nothing more than proper widths, proper angles, proper lengths, and proper overlaps. Okay? There's a few more rules, proper spacing and opening sizes and such. We'll get to that at some point in time. But that's what being a master digitizer is. In fact, if you look at any good running design you've ever run, what you're going to see when you just simply go in and measure some of the aspects of it, you're going to see my numbers are greater. You have to, folks. You have to. That's what being a master digitizer is. Look, I didn't leave time for questions, but I do have something very exciting that I want to talk about now, and it's really the reason why I'm so pumped up tonight. Many of you have received an email, you all should have, about the new My Floriani Club. If you haven't, folks, the address is www.myfloriani.club, and I'm going to jump to it right now, okay?
Can I say woohoo?
Thank you for the woo-woo, Kathy. Look, folks, this is something that is brand new for Floriani software. It is an exclusive club for owners of Floriani software only. Right here you'll see that My Floriani Club is an exclusive club for owners of Floriani software. If you have not gotten your welcome letter, which contained your username and password, click here. It will talk you through the process. It's very, very simple. I cannot stress how important and how exciting this area is, okay? I'm going to get into it in just a little bit, but what I want to first talk about, and again, very important, www.myfloriani.club, and it will take you right to the site. But here's what I want to talk about, folks. Coming soon, Floriani will be issuing a brand new update to your software in the very, very near future. This update, and let me explain it very clearly, unlike those in the past, will need to be picked up at the Floriani retailer that sold you the software. Please, please watch for an email letting you know when the new version is available, okay? Look, we know you're going to love the new features, and as always, the update is free. I have got to tell you that I have never been so excited about an update in my life. It is going to be amazing. I think you're all going to love it. I'll get back to it in just a little bit, but please go to myfloriani.club. Often I'll explain why. Now, first of all, some of the exciting things about the club. I don't think I've been able to talk about this because it just started on a webinar, so I don't think I covered it in the last webinar. I have in my speeches. But once you're registered and you have your email address and your password, you'll sign in. Let me explain what takes place. First of all, there's a brand new daily blog that I write. Folks, I love this. It can be a technical blog. You'll find, those of you who've read sometimes it's just personal stories. Kathy and I did a class last week at Linda Z's in Chicago, and I sat with 100 ladies in this room, a little more than 100. Kathy doing a hands-on sewing class, and it made me reminisce about how I got involved in this industry. I am sorry, it actually put me in tears because it reminded me of my father and how much he would have loved this industry. But it took me back to my beginning. So you'll see blogs like that. It can be a thought for the day. It could be something very personal to me. It can be something very technical. I'm very excited about the blogs. For the first time, we're putting within the My Floriani Club our projects of the month, okay? For the first time, you can go and get the projects of the month directly within the club. These can be digitizing projects. Normally, they are creating a product. It gives you step-by-step. These are some of the ones that are up there right now. The projects of the month are absolutely amazing, and they are in there for you, again, exclusively for Floriani software owners. Your free monthly designs are now located on the club, okay, or within the club. So you can get all your current designs, all the past designs. Webinars. Now, all of the past webinars that I've done are located in here. But not only that, this is going to be an area also we're going to announce for Floriani software owners only, separate webinars that I'm going to be doing, advanced teaching classes. I'm actually proposing that I interview some of the notables in embroidery. I know some amazing digitizers that I would love to share their knowledge with you. This is going to be a forum that allows me to do that for you. I'm very excited about the webinars, the current ones, and the new ones that are coming up. There's training and lessons that are going to be on there, digitizing services that we offer, new products that we come out with. New product insight is located on there. Project or competitions. This is incredible. Let me click on this for you, folks. We want to see what you folks are doing. We want you to send us a picture of your project, a brief description as to how it was created using your Floriani products and software. If selected, you know what? I'm going to send you a personal invitation to use your project as a lesson for other software owners, and you're going to receive a special prize as well as recognition on the My Floriani Club project page. I think this is exciting. Look, when I got involved in this industry, your passion overwhelmed me, but I think even more so your creativity overwhelmed me. We want to see it. I want to see what you're doing. We want to highlight you folks. Some of you have gotten to the point that it needs to be noticed, and it needs to be noted, and I want to give that to you. Goodies and extras you're going to find out there, and then certainly information about your account. But again, for me, the highlight is the new update. In fact, I'm going to close this by just simply telling you folks, this is an exciting time to be the owner of Floriani Suite and Total Control software, as well as part of what I consider my Floriani family of embroiderers. I will personally advise you to check the club as often as possible, if not daily. All the pertinent information to this amazing new update and the things to come will be found there. Okay? Also, this changes daily, and it's what I simply label now as constant content. One of the most exciting things about learning is constant content. Things changing daily, new exciting things happening, thoughts of the day, projects from you. It's going to be an amazing time for us all, folks. Please check your emails also for additional info. And I have to close and just tell you, first of all, you know what? If you got a friend who doesn't have Floriani software, I think it's a real good time to tell them to get involved. Those of you who have it, all of you online, you mean the world to me. I have never been so excited in my life about the update and what it will mean to you, our loyal and amazing Floriani software owners. And then, you know what, folks, with that said, hugs and stitches to everyone out there. And from the heart, I truly love you all. Good night, everyone. I'm sorry we didn't have time for questions, but get ready. This is exciting. The update is exciting. Please check the club and watch your email. Again, hugs and stitches, everyone. I truly do love you. Good night, Kathy. Good night, everyone.
Walt.
Thank you all, my moderators. I hope you all enjoyed tonight. I'll see you next time.
Thanks so